Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 KWS Trade Launch. We're delighted that so many of you can join us here today. And although we're not here together in person, it's starting to see that we've got light at the end of the tunnel. We look forward to being able to see more of you in person over the course of the next couple of months. Thank you very much for giving up your time today. I know it's a very busy time of the year for everybody, and we've got a really exciting schedule of speakers here for you to hear today, and topics that we want to be able to cover. So who have we got that you'll be hearing from today? As you can see here, from the commercial team, we've got Kirsty, John, James and Dom, faces that you'll know well. And we're also joined by Mark from our breeding teams looking after winter wheat, and Gabby, who's taken over the winter barley programme recently. And on the right hand side, you'll also see Olivia, who will be a new face to many of you. Olivia's joined us recently and as our technical specialist, working very closely with Kirsty, and she'll be able to strengthen the technical offering that we will be able to give to the trade. And I'm delighted that she's joined us and look forward to her meeting as many of you as possible in the next couple of months. So looking forward to the agenda, what points are we going to be covering today? Well, first of all, we've got the wheat candidates that we'll be looking at. It's going to be a very exciting year for KWS this year. We've got 5 winter wheat candidates that are up for recommendation this autumn: KWS Palladium, KWS Guium, KWS Brium, KWS Dawsum and KWS Henum. And we're going to be hearing more about them from Mark and Kirsty later on. We're then going to be looking at our very exciting new barley candidate, KWS Feeris, which is a BYDV tolerant line. Then we've got one first of our external speakers, and we've got Sam Brooke, CEO from the BSPB, who many of you will know, who will be joining us today. And certainly over the last 10 years, I've spoken to many of you there, looking at how we need to capture value for traits that are brought through to the marketplace. It's been a very topical subject there, and we've discussed it for the likes of orange blossom midge in the past. BYDV is a trait that is going to be very valuable to growers alike out there, and we need to ensure that we're able to capture value there for our industry so that we can continue to invest and bring these traits to market. We're going to be talking more about the technology, the BSPB Trade Protection Scheme that we'll be launching today, and KWS Feeris will be the first variety that will be on the scheme, which we're very excited about. After that, we're going to be looking at the rye market with Dom and James, Dom and JB, sorry, and we're going to be looking at KWS Teo, which is our exciting new candidate coming further forward, available in the market this autumn, and also looking at how the market's developing. This has been one of the areas at the moment which has perhaps been limiting the potential growth of hybrid rye in total, and we want to update you on the developments in this sector. And we really believe that when we're delivering our stock seed into the marketplace there, that it's important that we deliver it to the very highest standard. And for us, this means teaming up the top genetics there with the top seed treatments. And we're delighted that we've got David Leahy, who will be with us today, to be able to tell us more about the treatment that we'll be using this autumn, Kinto Plus, and the benefits that it will be able to bring to our growers alike. After that, James will be taking us through and looking at the commercial offering that we've got available for this autumn. We'll be looking at how our varieties are coming into the marketplace, how we see them developing over the course of the next couple of years, and that the propositions that we're putting to you in terms of the launch. After that, we're going to have a question and answer session there, which will be available for 10 minutes. This is really important for us. This is very much a partnership with the trade, and so we welcome all the questions that you have today, so please put them through. There's on the right hand side, you'll see a little box there in the Teams chat, which you can put your questions in there, and please put them in there. We look forward to answering as many of those as possible. If we can't answer all of them today, we will come back to you very, very soon. So now we're going to go out to the field with Mark and Kirsty, and we're going to take a look through the first of our winter wheats.
So hello from the PDF field at KWS. My name is Kirsty Richards and I'm here with our wheat breeder Mark Dodds to tell you a little bit about our winter wheat candidates for harvest 2021. We've got 5 coming through, so there's a lot of information that we're going to take you through in the next 20 minutes. But before we take a closer look at the candidates, let's think about the season that we've just been through. As we know, there doesn't seem to be a typical season anymore, and 2020-2021 is no exception. So if we think back to drilling, many people were actually able to get on very much better than they were in the previous year, and a lot of crops were sown on time. But it was really as the season progressed that we started to see some difficulties come into this growing season. Mark, what have you seen in the fields this year?
Well, we did have a very wet winter, and then April was very cold. We had a record amount of frosts in the UK in April, and that's meant their crop is very, very late. And then May's been very wet. We'll be expecting some septoria in the coming weeks, but again, the dry, cold April has held up the yellow rust, so there's not so much yellow rust around this year as there was last year.
Okay, so I think really it's all about looking at the resilience of a variety as we get through to harvest to see how they're performing in this year.
Yep, every season is very, very different. And getting varieties that perform year on year in these difficult seasons is what it's becoming all about these days.
Excellent. Okay, so if we now think about the candidates that we're going to look at, we've got 5 from KWS. 1 is a potential milling wheat, 2 are potential biscuit wheats, and 2 are hard feed types. And we're going to take a look through their characteristics in terms of end use, disease and yield performance, and really give you a flavour of what these varieties have got to offer to the marketplace as we move forward towards recommendation. So these varieties obviously are up for recommendation this November and will be available on the market for drilling 2022. And really that's quite a challenge for these varieties, because in this time period we're going to see the loss of some of the triazoles for yellow rust control. So it's really important that this is a robust set of varieties going through to provide something useful for the farmer. And I think one common theme between all of these varieties that we're going to present to you today is they've all got very good yellow rust resistance. So first off, we're here in KWS Palladium. This is our potential milling wheat, W388. It's a Zayat Trinity cross. And many of you looking at the list will see that we've got very used to seeing Zayat and Crusoe and Skyfall as the mainstays of the Group 1 sector. And I think really looking across the whole of the UK pipeline, we can see that there are no standout potential Group 1 varieties from any of the breeders coming through. So really the message from today is that your varieties in Group 1 that exist today are the ones that are certainly going to be the mainstay of that sector in the next couple of years. But looking at the potential of Palladium, as it's gone through our own private milling trials, we've seen some really nice performances in terms of end-use characteristics. It's got a good grain. It also produces stronger flowers with good gluten and a nice low volume when baked into the final product. So I think all in all, a very good variety for the Group 2 sector. But obviously we'll see as loaves are baked after this harvest what the final UK flour millers assessment will be.
Agronomically, it's short, stiff, it's high yielding as a first wheat and a second wheat, so a real all-rounder. It's good all-round disease as well, and particularly good on yellow rust and septoria, making a really useful package for the farmer. I think in terms of yield security and getting it in the shed, the short and stiff keeps it stood. It's got a very high Hagberg from one of its parents, Trinity, and it also appears to have inherited the sprouting resistance that Trinity had, and Trinity was the best around in its day. Adding to the harvest security, the 7.3 that it's got for septoria gives a level of security during the growing season as well. Better flexibility on spray windows should the weather not be so good at the key times. So that's a real useful tool for the farmers. In terms of development, it's not quite as fast a developing variety as X-Days, which means you can sow it a little bit sooner than X-Days, but it's still fast enough that for later sowings it's going to get established and give you a good yield at the later sowings. So overall it's a real rounded package and can do a lot of jobs for the farmer. So as well as performing well in all of those agronomic situations, it's notable that it yields particularly well in the north. It's 102% in the north at the moment, and that indicates that it's a very fertile variety, which makes it very safe for farmers.
In summary, KWS Palladium is the really clean bread-making wheat with harvest security built in. It's a potential Group 2 with good grain and baking potential, along with good yield performance in both first and second cereal situations, across all the regions and across differing seasons too. It has excellent untreated yields thanks to its strong disease scores, including a 7.3 for septoria, 9 for yellow rust and 8 for mildew. Shorter and stiffer than KWS 6 days, it offers milling wheat growers a useful alternative on more fertile sites, whilst, like its stablemate, being early to mature, it's an essential characteristic it has as a top quality milling wheat.
So before we dive into our biscuit potential candidates, KWS Guium and KWS Brium, we'll just take a quick look at the Group 3 sector because it's become quite crowded since the last recommendations. I think it's really important to think about which varieties the biscuit houses have actually seen go through in their manufacturing processes. And I would say it's still really down to KWS Firefly and potentially Barrel and Illicit as well as the tried and tested varieties within that sector. Newer varieties will still, of course, have passed all the UK flour millers' tests to become Group 3s, but biscuit manufacturers will still need to get some experience about what those varieties can offer. However, we do have these two new varieties coming to the market face. First is KWS Guium. From an end-use perspective, it's got the right resistance and extensibility characteristics assessed by the UK flour millers so far to be a potential Group 3, and it also has a tick against its distilling potential, so an array of markets that it could serve. And also worth bearing in mind that it has really nice grain as well, with a specific weight of 78.2 kilograms per hectolitre. But Mark, tell us a little bit more about the variety.
So in the Group 3 sector, Firefly was the first of many cougar varieties that have come through and been recommended or current candidates. Guium has a different parentage. It's a row and tempo. I think that is of interest. We don't want to get too much into one background in UK agriculture. It's very high yielding. It's the highest yielding biscuit candidate. It's got really good yellow rust, but unfortunately at the moment the septoria score isn't that good. I think the septoria is actually quite reasonable from what I've seen in the variety's development. I would rate it similar to Skyscraper. So last year we didn't get much septoria. This year, with the rain we've had in May, it looks like we're going to get some. So hopefully that septoria rating will come back to where it is. But the scores to date are as they are, so I wouldn't rule the variety out, but watch this space and see how it performs this year, because with those really high yields, I think it's still an interesting variety and may come back into people's reckoning. So agronomically, it's short and stiff, performs on a number of agronomic situations, first, second wheat, so there are a lot of interesting features on this variety.
So on to our next biscuit candidate now, KWS Brium. This is a solo times Basset cross and offers some new genetics into the Group 3 sector potentially. Obviously you'll remember KWS Basset from its really good biscuit making potential, and this one so far has ticked all the boxes with the UK flour millers. Has really good balance of resistance and extensibility, plus the all important good Hagberg and protein measurements the biscuit manufacturers are looking for. Another characteristic this variety has is the potential to distill, and this of course will be confirmed by SWRI as we get towards recommendation. But that's really the end use perspective, so a wide array of markets this variety may be able to serve. Mark, what about its yield?
So let's start with looking at the north. It yielded 103% in the north, which is the same as Skyscraper, and it's got many beneficial agronomic features that really fit that northern market. It's relatively early, it's a +1. It's a Basset type in terms of growth development through the winter, so that means it's good for early sowing, which again fits the north. It's good for mildew, it's a 7 for mildew, and good on yellow rust, which you need for the whole country now. Septoria's in the middle, about 5.5, same as Skyscraper. It's a bit shorter than Skyscraper and it's stiff straw. So when you put all of those together, the package for the north looks really strong. But we don't just expect it to be of interest to the north. Basset was a big variety in some southern counties of the country. And I think with the biscuit potential and the growth type that was popular down there, it can also fit for some of the southern counties.
In summary, our two biscuit candidates are worth keeping an eye on this harvest. KWS Guium has excellent yield potential, especially in the east where its stiff straw, good yellow rust and orange blossom weed resistance will be key. KWS Brium offers genetic diversity into the Group 3 sector and is a great variety for the north, thanks to its combination of distilling potential, very high yields in this region, good mildew resistance, stiff straw and +1 maturity.
So now we come to the hard feed sector, and obviously this is all about yield, but I think this sector has changed a lot over the last 10 years. It's no longer just possible to have a variety that's out and out yield, it's got to have something else around it. And if we think back to last year's recommendations, certainly from our portfolio, we had KWS Cranium, which has a number of uses in the east particularly, where it's good for yellow rust, has blossom midge and that really high yield as well. So moving on to the candidates, this is KWS Henum. And KWS Henum is a variety that really does have that yield potential, but also something special around it too. And what makes the variety special is its septoria resistance. KWS, along with Farmers Weekly, did a survey last year where we actually asked a whole range of farmers what were their 3 most important characteristics they used to select a wheat variety. And unsurprisingly, 98% of farmers that replied said that actually septoria resistance was something that they considered to be the most important characteristic they used to select a variety. And at a 7.8, KWS Henum has the highest septoria score in terms of resistance in all of the NL2s after harvest 2020. But Mark, tell us a little bit more about the variety. You've seen it across Europe.
Well, it's not just a one-trick pony. It's got many other really positive features for farmers. It's quite a slow developer. So for early sowing, it's perfect type. Last year in our own trial here, it did 108%. It was the highest yielding variety from a 10th of September sowing. It's very short. It's very stiff, which again fits with early sowing, as well as that good septoria that we've seen here. That the septoria has been good elsewhere around Europe. The variety is also in development in Denmark, where they use lower inputs, and the very high untreated yields we've seen here with the combination of yellow rust and septoria have also been seen there. With that septoria resistance, we can see it fitting really well in the west, that combination of stiff straw and good septoria resistance. We see it suited for early sowing or in very high fertility situations. So now, as Kirsty said, yield isn't the be-all and end-all. It's still important, but with these other agronomic features, this is a really interesting variety.
For growers in the West or those looking to reduce their overall septorial load on farm, KWS Henum offers something special. At a score of 7.8, it achieved the best septoria resistance in NL2, whilst excellent untreated yields are bolstered by good resistances to mildew and yellow rust. The perfect partner to KWS 6 days on farm, KWS Henum performs best in the true early slot, drilled before the 10th of September, and should be every grower's first variety in the drill in the autumn.
So we're on to our last candidate now, KWS Dawsum. This is obviously a hard Group 4 variety and something that's really exciting that we're bringing to the market this season. KWS Dawsum is a KWS Guium by Castello cross, and it really does bring a new era in the combination of yield and grain quality. Now, usually I wouldn't talk about the end use of a hard feed variety, but I think this variety really does warrant that discussion, and that's because at over 80 kilos per hectolitre, it has fantastic specific weight at really high yields. 6% ahead of something like Castello, which has a similar spec weight. So a really exciting variety in terms of farmers looking to serve a feed market, but also a useful variety for those that have local homes such as millers near them. It's going to be one that everyone looks out for.
Back in 2012, specific weight became a really key feature for varieties. We had quite a late air emergence time and then a dull June. So if we get that dull June again this year, we could be in for some low specific weights. With KWS Dawsum having a super high specific weight, it means you've got less chance of penalties should those specific weight levels generally come down for the whole season. The ones with lower specific weights will dip to levels where you might get a penalty, but the ones with the best specific weights will stay above 76 and not give farmers any financial penalties. In terms of yield, Dawsum has performed really well all around the country. It's done specifically well in the west as well. Its disease profile has no real weaknesses. It's an 8 for mildew, a 9 for yellow rust, and it's over 6 for septoria, which makes it a really attractive proposition for a lot of farmers. We've got some older varieties in the market at the moment, like Castello, Guium and Guium, where those varieties have no real weaknesses in terms of disease, and some of them are grown for really high specific weight. This takes it to the next level for farmers who have grown those varieties in the past. The one weakness it has is that it doesn't have orange blossom midge resistance, but then neither do Castello or Guium. And I think there's enough other agronomics around the variety with fairly short, very stiff straw, and that overall disease package, which still will make it a first choice for farmers. In terms of sowing time and rotation, to be a top yielding variety, you've got to be good in all of those these days. So it does pretty well early sown, The specific weight means you can sow later on into the season again without penalty. It's done well as a first wheat, done well as a second wheat, and again, second wheat, the specific weight can be lower, so it has that security in that slot too.
In summary, KWS Dawsum is just plain awesome. This bankable barn filler is a hard feed type that can offer great yields across all the sites and seasons, with exceptional specific weight of 80.1 kilos per hectolitre. It is a very clean, nice plant type and comes with a wide sowing window, offering ultimate flexibility at drilling. Couple all of that with the excellent disease resistance, and you really do have a special combination of characteristics available in this variety.
So for growers looking to the future, KWS has a complete range of wheats for the next generation of challenges we face in UK production. But how do I choose which one to grow on my farm? KWS Henum, first in the drill across the UK, with superb septoria, and it's very stiff-strawed too. KWS Dawsum, awesome combination of yield and disease resistance, awesome grain, and awesome flexibility on farm. KWS 6 Days, tried and trusted septoria resistance, unrivaled untreated yields, and highly marketable grain. KWS Palladium, a suitable partner for its days, offering a diversity of genetics to decrease septorial load on farm. It's very stiff-strawed for fertile sites and heavy land. KWS Brium, different genetics for the soft feed sector. Biscuit and distilling markets potentially available too. A step on for yellow rust, mildew and stem stiffness for the north. KWS Cranium, great yield potential when sown later. Best combination of midge with yellow rust resistance and super stiff straw. KWS Next Generation Wheats, the new 3-year strategy for your farm.
Mark and Kirsty, thank you very much for that. It was great to get a better insight into those 5 candidates that are certainly looking very exciting and already attracting a lot of interest. And I think it will be very interesting for James to be able to show us later on there how we see those varieties developing over the course of the next couple of years. I'm sure you've also got lots of questions about those varieties, so please don't forget to put your questions into the box there on your team's onto your team sheet there and send them through to us, and we look forward to answering them at the end of the session. Right, so moving away now from wheat, we're going to take a look at barley. And I recently went out to the field with Gabby to find out more about KWS Feeris and the exciting benefits it's going to be able to bring to growers over the course of the next couple of years. KWS Feeris is our exciting new 6-row winter barley candidate that will be up for recommendation this autumn. It's the first variety that will be added to the recommended list with BYDV tolerance and a complete all-round package. I'm here with our barley breeder Gabby to find out why this trait is important to farmers and the benefits it can bring to them. So Gabby, can you tell us more about the trait?
Yeah, so BYDV tolerance is conferred by a gene that we call RYD2. It's been around breeding a really long time. So this variety comes from our French breeding program, and our barley breeder there has been working with this gene for a very long time. It's been a trait of importance over there. We finally brought something to the market that fits the UK really, really well. The importance of a trait like BYDV tolerance, which is unique at the moment on the 6-row here, is that it's the risk aversion. So, you know, we could be doing barley earlier to avoid the rains, but if you do that, you risk getting BYDV in your crop. You could also have delay in sprays because of the weather. And so if you have something like Feeris in your field, then if you do delay your spray, you don't have to worry. You don't have to sit there and be like, what is going to happen with my crop? Am I going to get a lot of BYDV in it? So it brings a lot of assurance to a farmer. And I think any kind of risk that you can avoid in your farm is very important. It just gives you that peace of mind. So with a BYDV tolerant variety like Feeris, it means that even if it gets infected by aphids, it would still grow out of the BYDV. So you can detect BYDV in the plant, but actually when it grows up, it looks just as pretty as this. So we can show you later in the field a comparison of an infected Feeris compared to a susceptible, and it looks really nice.
And I suppose with barley, looking at it, BYDV, it's more of a problem with barley than wheat, you know, with the nature of it being sown that bit earlier.
Yes, that's it. So it's a lot more obvious in barley as well. So you get those big patches of yellow dwarfed plants in the field compared to wheat, where you sometimes can see a bit of red, but it really doesn't impact yield as often in the wheat as it does in the barley.
Thanks very much for that, Gabby. And we can see that trait's going to be hugely powerful out there in the marketplace. I mean, looking at the variety in its own right, though, it's no slouch. It's an Amistar Cosmos cross there, and it's got a very good disease resistance against the more traditional diseases like net blotch and rhynchosporium there. But can you tell us more about the variety itself?
Yeah, so Feeris is, so as Will mentioned, is an Amistar cross. It's a step up on Amistar compared to yield. It sits at around 104 for the UK, and especially good in the West at 109. Has good hectolitre weight at 68.7. It's always also very stiff strawed with alongside the BYDV. It's just another way for the farmer to have that security of, you know, with the changing climate, am I going to get a lot of rain? Is this going to fall over? And it really shouldn't with Feeris because it's very stiff. It's also, you know, 5-10 centimetres shorter than some hybrids, which can be beneficial if you are concerned about standability. Well, I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about the feedback you have from the market for this variety. Where does it place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think up until now, we've seen a number of varieties that have come through to the marketplace over the last couple of years that have perhaps had yield penalties or have had weaknesses against certain disease resistances. And of course, all of these varieties up until now haven't gone through the official trialling process, so it hasn't gone through the RL trials. Well, Feeris changes all of that. It's the first variety that will be added to the recommended list with no weaknesses and yields that are able to compete at the very top level, right up there with the hybrid level. So as you can imagine, with all of these benefits there as well, it has meant that the variety's proved to be very, very popular, and we've had a really good uptake and interest in demand for this variety. And I see that Feeris is going to be very popular, not just for areas that are hit hard by BYDV, but as a mainstream variety for the whole of the UK. So here we are in our BYDV disease trial. What we can see here is the extremes that this disease can bring and the effects that it can bring into the crop. Now, obviously, Gabby, what we're seeing here is not going to be typically what a farmer's going to be seeing out there on their farm. You know, we have infected these plots artificially here, but it's a salient point and a salient reminder there to look at what the disease can do there in some really high pressure areas.
Yeah, that's it. So obviously this one has a lot of plants that are really, really dead at the bottom there. We can show you a little clump of barley. You know, that used to be barley. That's not going to happen very often in the field. But this plot here on the right hand side is a bit more common. So they're just kind of circles of the disease pressure there, you know, like dwarf and yellow circles. So that's a bit more common about what you'd see. How much BYDV you get on the field depends on the year, depends on the aphid pressure, where you're located, how often you grow barley. And that's why something like KWS Feeris, that you can see, it's just growing as normal. It's a normal barley plant in a really heavy infected field. So as Will said, this is an extreme infection because that's the point we're trying to drive home. You know, it's tolerance, so it does get BYDV in its system, but it's growing fine.
I think that's the point. We've got to change our mindset about how we look at these tools and how we use these traits. You know, a trait like this is really, really important. And clearly in a high pressure situation, if we're looking at some of these coastal areas, particularly on some of the south coast areas, a trait like this can really come into its own there. And I think it's important there that growers really understand the pressures that they're facing there and use these traits in an appropriate manner.
I think with the changing climate, you know, farmers want something that's more resilient, and this is going to bring safety. It's going to bring peace of mind. If you drill early, if you spray late, you know, it's going to do really well. And I think that's something really important with the changing climate.
Thanks very much for that, Gabby. And it's great to really be able to understand the variety there. And I think it's clear to see the benefits that it's going to be able to bring. So, of course, we can see that this trait has got immense value there for the growers. But how are we going to take this variety to market there? And importantly, how are we going to be able to capture value for all parties involved in this to ensure that we can continue to bring these traits and this other work and this development to marketplace? As I mentioned earlier on, we've been working very closely with Sam and a team at BSPB to look at ways that we can actually add value there and bring value back into the industry there. And I'm delighted that KWS Feeris will be the first variety that will be launched through the BSPB Trait Protection Scheme. And I met up with her recently there and had a conversation about how this is going to work in practice. So let's hear a little bit more about it.
Trait protection is a widely discussed topic, and certainly over the last 10 years I've had many discussions with members of the trade when we've looked at the traits like orange blossom midge, non-GN spring barleys, and how we capture extra value from these products there in the marketplace. Obviously these traits take a huge amount of investment there from a plant breeder, and to be able to support continued investment in plant breeding, we need to be able to ensure that we can actually capture some value from these traits. Up until now, this has been difficult to be able to do so in an efficient and effective way. And so we've been delighted to hear recently about the new scheme that's been launched by the BSPB, the Trait and Trader Protection Scheme, and what it can actually do and benefit growers, the trade and breeders alike. And I'm delighted that Sam Brooke's here with us today, the Chief Executive of BSPB, to tell us a little bit more about the scheme.
Great, thank you, Will. And I would agree, in discussions that we've been having with our plant breeder members, it's clear that they need to find a better way of protecting traits. As you know, as I know, trait development costs a huge amount of money. You know, simply bringing a new variety into the market costs a significant amount of money. And we need to find a way of protecting these new traits. You know, genetics are now at the forefront of the answers that growers need. In the UK, you know, we know that the chemical industry is under pressure. We're losing good chemistry, and genetic traits are going to become more and more to the forefront of the answers that farmers have to control pests, to control disease, etc. So what we wanted to do was find a simple solution for plant breeders to be able to protect these traits without making too many changes to the current system. So this is all about keeping it simple for growers, keeping it simple for the trade, whilst ensuring that the plant breeders can get the return on investment they need to keep developing and keep investing in these new traits. And that's where the Trait Protection Scheme came from.
Well, that's great to hear. And I think really, you know, what we want to see from it there is how it works. And really the key to it there is simplicity, as you just said there. You know, we've looked at how we want to be able to do this, but ensuring that it's easy for growers to be able to work with the scheme is going to be key to its success. Could you tell us a little bit about how it actually works?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's all about keeping it simple. We don't want long, complex contracts that, you know, just confuse everybody and ensure that you're going to be, you know, put off the idea straight away. So what we've looked at doing with this trait protection scheme is we've keeping it completely separate from the seed royalty. So the farmers, the seed trade and plant breeders know and understand, you know, how our current system works for variety protection. It's under legislation. It's now moved into UK legislation, and we know how that works. So we know that we have a certified seed royalty and then obviously a farm safe seed royalty. The trait protection scheme doesn't change that. So any variety will still have a seed royalty collected. And of course, that will be at a certified level and at a farm safe seed level. What we will do is collect the trait separately to the seed royalty. That way, it gives great visibility as to the value of the trait. It gives great choice as well for the growers. It means it's very obvious as to what the value is of that trait. That's what's important, because you know, we need farmers to be able to make that choice that trait's worth that value, and then ensure we can get that value, you know, back into plant breeding. So what we've done to enable us to do this, because of course the fact that I've mentioned that seed royalty is in legislation means that the BSPB can enforce the payment of that royalty. When it comes to trait protection, there's no legal requirement for a grower or the seed trade to pay a trait fee. So what we need to do is we need to make that contractual, basically. And what I've already mentioned is we didn't want to make that complicated. So what we've done is, because we're a third-party licensed organisation of you, the rights holder of the variety, we've made some changes to our agreement with you, and also our agreement with the seed trade, who are producing and, you know, processing and selling these varieties, to ensure that we've got this link where we can then collect the trait fee. So basically, you would say to me, Sam, this variety, I'd like it on a special collection. It's a trait protected variety. I would say that's fine. I would ensure that our licensed seed sellers and PRS holders are aware that that is a special collection variety. And then what we would ask the trade to do is then have a small clause, probably just 2 lines, which is a clause to allow BSPB to be a third party in then collecting the trait. So the one step we need support from the trade on would be this very small clause, which can either go into their standard terms and conditions of sale, if that's the easiest way of doing it, so that it's just already in their terms and conditions of sale, it's a standard clause, or they can add it specifically to the sales contract or invoice for that variety. So there's two options of doing it. I suppose if you add it into your terms and conditions of sale, it's already there for the future. Easy. And for hopefully a number of other varieties that will come through the same way. Whereas, you have got the choice just to add it in for that variety. Yeah. What we will then do, so if we look at it from you selling C1 seed this year, yes, we would then ask you to supply us with who had that C1 seed. We will then make contact with them to ensure that we know who they've sold the C2 seed to. Yes. And under all the correct data protection and GDPR legislation, we will collect the data of those sales. We will then make individual contact with those farmers to ensure that they know that variety is subject to a trait fee. We then go forward. So we're now talking actually autumn 2023, I guess, where we will make contact with all those farmers to request payment for that trait fee if they've farm saved it.
Excellent. Well, that seems very, very straightforward. And I think, looking at it there, it looks as though it's something that could be proved to be very, very successful out there. And certainly, we've looked at it over the last few years in terms of this trait collection there. A scheme like this, I think, could be very successful in ensuring that we can continue to be able to breed for these traits. Investment can carry on back in there as well, and also crucially be able to provide investment and the right traits for the farmer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great way of us being able to maintain the really successful seed royalty collection that we've got in the UK. And as you know, it's one of the best in the world. Yes. And we should be very proud of that. And it works very well. But at the same time, we need to find a way to increase that income to protect these new traits that are coming through. And the trait protection scheme also doesn't just need to be a new trait. If you guys did something clever with yellow rust resistance in the future, for example, you could use a scheme like this to protect that variety as well. And you're right, it just ensures that we maintain a good level of investment in UK plant breeding.
Fantastic. Sam, thank you very much for explaining that to us today.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks very much for that, Sam, and for giving us the insight about how the scheme's going to work. I'm sure there are still going to be lots of questions about that, so please do try and send them through. And again, we will be available to take calls after the presentation, and so will Sam. So please send any of those questions through. I'm very happy to explain that, and we will be sending out information about how it will work after the briefing. Right. So moving on now, we're going to be turning our attentions on to the next crop that we'll be focusing on, hybrid rye. And there's been a huge amount of attention in hybrid rye over the course of the last couple of years there. And we're certainly starting to see the demand and the appetite for the species increase. We've got some great products that have come through to the market in the last couple of years, like Serafino, and we're going to add Teo to our offering this year. So we're now going to hand over to JB and Dom, who are going to take us through an insight into Teo and actually look at how the market for rye is developing in the UK.
Welcome everyone to a short session on hybrid rye. My name is John, hybrid rye product manager. I'm joined by my colleague Dominic.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dominic Maria, and my role is a little bit wider than John's. Going to put some questions specifically on rye for John's expertise. Okay, John, the key thing that I'm interested to see is the future proof of rye. What is the future of rye? Particularly for the UK arable farmers. First of all, on sort of climate change, and that's where do you see?
I think first of all on drought tolerance, we, despite having a slightly wetter time at the time of filming this, the general trend for the next 10 years is drier. that would hurt people's yield performance if they did nothing else. So in terms of what rye brings, we get a 25% saving in water consumption. And if we look forward the next 5, 10, 15 years, having more drought means we should have more rye almost by accident because we've got that drought tolerance.
One of the other things that is really, really important on farm, costs and lack of chemicals. Yeah. How does rye compete against other cereals in terms of the reduction of the chemicals that we have available?
This is really interesting. So we only really have to contend with brown rust. We don't suffer yellow rust, we don't suffer too much rhynchosporium, and septoria, which is the major disease of wheat and is quite expensive to control. Yes, rye is affected by septoria, but far less. So in terms of agrochemical spend, the feedback we've had from people who are growing rye is it actually frees up the sprayer to concentrate on those higher risk crops and de-risking your disease through growing more rye, which I think is quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that sort of leads on in terms of the government's agenda of carbon neutral, net zero by 2040 and the reduction of chemicals there. How does that sort of play in particularly in terms of nitrogen?
So if we were looking at the net zero goal by 2040, one of the biggest gains, if you like, from reducing carbon emissions is fertilizer. When we grow rye, we have approximately 45% reduction compared to second wheat for the same yield. So if you took the yield to one side and you purely looked at the, if you like, the environmental credentials, having such an enormous saving in nitrate fertilizer use means that an arable farmer who's looking to qualify for whatever schemes environmentally or otherwise emerge, then demonstrating that through the use of growing rye is once again quite an easy tick box for him. Whereas perhaps in some of the other crops, it's much harder to get those savings because we're already on the limits, if you like.
And then moving to the other end of the spectrum in terms of, that we're seeing lots of growers really liking rye, but that end market is still developing. Yes. How are we able to show, or how are you able to show that, rye really has a positive benefit, not just as a feed product, but on animal welfare?
Yeah, so one of the key features for the livestock industry is reduced antibiotics, coupled with the fact that we want to increase our food production standards. So having a pig unit with less tail biting, less gut ulceration, better gut health, better immunity, and not having so much antibiotics, and that industry is phasing out into antibiotics. If you do that, you need dietary fibre, and you can't get dietary fibre off the shelf. This is why people are looking at things like rye, because unlike other cereals, we have a very high level of dietary fibre, and everybody knows the health benefits of rye. The same is true for livestock. In terms of the actual end use demand, first of all, we have to generate enough tonnage to attract a response, and I think we can all see that is happening. Later on this year, there will be a series of official feeding studies that we've been working on for the last 2-3 years now. If you can sort of couple this move towards growing rye with feeding rye, I think we're on a very good trend. Okay,
and so we've talked about the agronomics and the advantages of rye, and you just explained from the end user potential. I mean, if you were a grower and you weren't quite ready to go down that route, what would you say to them in terms of sort of the financial sustainability and as part of a rotational income?
One thing we can all see at the moment is we are at a crossroads in terms of what our rotational model should be, or compared to where it has been in the past. When you reduce some of the key break crops, oilseed rape plus some others, and you start looking at other crops, but of course you then have to look at what is generating a positive overall gross margin, gross income, rather than the historic model, which was to almost have one crop pay for the other, particularly where your rotation is too short. So if you grow rye, it's another crop in your rotation. It's a cash crop, grain and straw. A lot of farmers are selling straw more now than perhaps in the past. There are contracts available, certainly from last harvest going into this year. So the ability to lock into a contract gives you a home outside of perhaps a local feed home as well. The other final aspect on this is reduced support. So BPS payments will be tapered down, and that means that farmers are going to have to work harder to have a cropping rotation which is self-financing. And I think that's where this crop starts to become very attractive.
And I think that pretty much sums up both from the agronomic and the end user perspective. And next we'll talk about a couple of our varieties. So here we are, John, in front of the KWS Teo. Last year, Serafino came on as a fully described variety onto the descriptive list.
Yes.
And now we have Teo as a candidate variety. Can you give us a little bit more information about it?
First of all, to say KWS Teo is the group's largest variety across all markets, so sort of Canada, US, right through to Russia and Poland. It's the sister of Serafino, so we decided to put this on the list to match up with Serafino, and this carries a yield of 112%, which is 1% higher yielding than Serafino, but about 7 or 8% higher yielding than any other competitor. And so that's quite exciting from a yield development point of view.
Brilliant. And we can see that yield very easily demonstrated in terms of an older hybrid variety and Teo. And you can just visually see the difference in ear length. In comparison with these 2 years, you would say that's at least 15 to 20%. And that ear length transcribes to more grain sites. We don't see a loss in terms of the size of individual grains, and we don't see a loss in terms of the protein content despite the extra yield.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. So John, many benefits to these rye crops, and with the environmental impacts that are coming and the lack of chemicals, how does rye stack up in terms of disease?
So really these two varieties, particularly Teo now with the extra 1% yield, but they're also adding better brown rust resistance, and we've upped the resistance score by a considerable margin. So we talk about a 1 to 9 scale. Most hybrids are sort of 3 to 4. Serafino comes in at 7. Now Teo doesn't yet have an official score, but it will do next year. And because these two are from the same program, there's no reason to suggest that they won't have a similar pattern. That means, practically speaking, you can plant large acreages of these varieties, not have any real concern about losing control of brown rust, which is the main disease of rye outside of any other cereal disease. In terms of ergots and pollen plus, first of all, we use 100% F1. That gives us an advantage in terms of uniformity, but also maximum pollen shed, and that effectively is what the pollen plus trait delivers on all of our hybrids, is extra quantities of pollen to really manage the ergots effectively. And the final thing is we now have on our website a best practice guide, which is available.
And it is a very, very useful resource.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
No, absolutely. Excellent. Yeah, thanks very much for John. And I think on farm, growers can look forward to seeing some Teo from this autumn.
Yes, indeed.
Dom and JB, thanks very much for that. It's great to be able to get an insight really into how this market's developing. I mean, so there's certainly a lot more interest in it, and we're seeing that all the time. And I think this will continue to grow over the course of the next couple of months there, in line for the sales this autumn. And it's also very interesting to see how the varieties that we've got there in the marketplace, the part that they're going to play. So now we're going to move on, and we've got the second of our external speakers, David Leahy from BASF, who's the business development manager for them. And he's going to be talking to us today about Kinto Plus, which is a new seed treatment that they've brought to the marketplace, which we'll be putting onto our crops this autumn. And we really believe that in order to deliver the best possible crops out there, the best possible genetics there, we have to team it up with the best possible treatments there and make sure that we increase the standard all the time. We know that it's getting harder and harder out there to be able to contract crops there, and anything we can do to be able to help there and set the bar higher in terms of the standard that we can deliver, we think is very, very important. So we're going to go over to David now to be able to look at the new seed treatment there and understand some more about the benefits it's going to be able to bring to your growers.
Good morning. My name is David Leahy and I'm a Business Development Manager for BASF. I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to present to you this morning about our new generation seed treatment, Kinto Plus. Many of you on this call will be aware of our old seed treatment from a number of years ago, which was called Kinto. This was a combination of prochloraz and triticonazole. Kinto Plus represents a step from BASF into a new generation of seed treatments, combining fludeoxonil, triticonazole, and our market-leading SDHI, Xemium. Within BASF, we're acutely aware that the potential of any crop begins the day you drill the crop. Growers are willing to invest in the best possible genetics and the best possible varieties, but what growers also need to do is to protect that genetics and to protect those varieties with the best possible seed dressing. That's where Kinto Plus comes into the picture. So what is in Kinto Plus? As I mentioned on my previous slide, Kinto Plus is a combination of triticonazole, fludeoxonil, and Xemium. Kinto Plus is cleared across all winter cereals: barley, wheat, oats, rye, triticale, at the same low application rate of 1.5 litres per tonne. What's also worth mentioning is that Kinto Plus is BBPA approved, meaning it can be used on malting barley crops, again adding to its flexibility as a seed dressing. At an application rate of 1.5 litres per tonne, you are delivering 50 grams of fludeoxonil, 50 grams of triticonazole, and 50 grams of Xemium. It's this combination of three active ingredients that delivers a high level of seed and soil-borne disease protection. But what separates Kinto Plus from single-purpose dressings? Its physiological effects. As you can see, Kinto Plus has physiological effects on the label. What this means is that the Xemium component, the SDHI component contained within Kinto Plus, delivers plant vitality, enhanced root growth, which allows the crop to tolerate better in stressed conditions. So what is each active ingredient contained within Kinto Plus contributing in terms of the overall picture of seed and soil-borne disease infections? So if we take snow mold, for example, we can see that fludeoxonil is the backbone to that. Snow mold is more commonly referred to as Microdochium navale, and it does appear to be an issue that's becoming more and more pronounced every year. If we take fusarium, again, fludeoxonil, but this time in combination with triticonazole, is delivering a very, very strong level of control on disinfection. But what really separates Kinto Plus from other seed treatments is the level of control that can be achieved on loose smut. This is backboned by triticonazole. Where other seed dressings need support from triticonazole to deliver loose smut control, Kinto Plus already delivers market-leading loose smut control. If we go down to Rhizoctonia, for example, you can see that the SDHI component, the Xemium component, is delivering the control on disinfection. So effectively, the combination of three active ingredients is delivering a very high level of control across a wide range of seed diseases. So let's take a closer look of a single purpose dressing compared to Kinto Plus. Beret Gold, a seed dressing which many of you are aware of, has a strong profile on Microdochium navale. You can quite clearly see that this is obviously being delivered by fludeoxonil. And if we take the standard seed dressing rate of Barley Gold and the standard seed dressing rate of Kinto Plus of 1.5 litres per tonne, you can see that both applications are delivering 50 grams of fludioxonil. But what delivers even better microdocium control is the addition of xemium in Kinto Plus. This is something which we would have seen in our trials last season. If, for example, we look at this trial from this number of trials, should I say, 6 trials we ran across 19 and 20, you can see Kinto Plus and Barley Gold both delivering very high levels of microdocium control compared to the untreated, but it's that contribution of xemium coupled with fludioxonil that is really driving Kinto Plus on over a single purpose dressing in terms of microdocium control. Seed infected with microdocium can be devastating, particularly in the establishment phase. This is something which growers need to be very aware of, particularly following perhaps a difficult wet harvest, for example, where Navale levels are inevitably going to be high in seed lots. With growers now drilling later and later every season to combat blackgrass and BYDV, and potentially drilling into wet and cold seed beds, this is an ideal environment for microdocium navale to thrive. This is where Kinto Plus comes into its own, that combination of fludioxonil and xemium delivering market-leading navale control. I mentioned a little bit earlier that perhaps the real ace in the deck is the performance of Kinto Plus on loose smut. Loose smut can be found in wheat, but equally loose smut can be very, very devastating in barley, particularly where perhaps there's high levels of loose smut from previous harvests. A number of seasons ago in Ireland, we conducted a trial, and as you can see in the untreated, very, very, very high levels of loose smut. But what stood out for us was the high level of performance of Kinto Plus. Even if we look at another market-leading seed dressing in the form of Vibrance Duo, you can see that Kinto Plus was a long way ahead of that. Interestingly, the Vibrance range of material requires support from another seed dressing in order to bolster its loose smut control, whereas within Kinto Plus, we have all those bases covered from the word go. KWS are making great strides in the rye market, and this is certainly to be welcomed. But what we're also acutely aware of is that ergot is becoming a much bigger issue, particularly with the grassweed issues that we are finding. A number of years ago, BASF conducted a trial where we dressed a number of seed dressings onto ergot and then germinated these ergot pieces to see how much ergot would actually germinate following seed dressing. Each treatment contained 10 ergot pieces. So if you take the untreated, 7.5 of those 10 ergot pieces germinated. But if we look at the Kinto Plus and the other treatments, we achieved high levels of control across the board on ergot. This is certainly something which we're proud of and something which needs to be welcomed. But perhaps it's all well and good talking about seed and soil-borne diseases, and absolutely this is very, very important when discussing a seed dressing. But the game has moved on, okay? And certainly now growers are demanding a seed dressing which can lend itself to better establishment, better germination, better rooting. And certainly that's where Kinto Plus comes into its own. Again, backboned by xemium. Over the last number of years, we've looked at trials where we compared the impact of a seed dressing on different varieties. In this trial, we looked at KWS's market-leading variety here in Ireland, Costello. Costello is performing excellently in a field, as you'd expect. But with growers drilling later and later to combat BYDV, we wanted to see the impact which a seed dressing would have on a variety. There is a perception out there that seed dressings slow back emergence, and this is certainly the case when you look at Redigo Pro, for example. Prothioconazole by nature will slow down germination. But if we look at Kinto Plus and the amount of tillers per meter squared and equally the germinated plants per meter squared, you can see that we've achieved exceptional levels of germination. Again, Xenium driving that on. If we take another step forward and look at a variety that tends to get out of the blocks very, very quickly, for example, which not necessarily is a good thing, but equally it's a trait of that variety, and in this case, Bennington. And again, we look at the impact which the seed dressing has on that variety. If we take Redigo Pro, again, slowing down the germination process of that crop, and equally the amount of tillers per meter squared not to where you'd like them to be. But if you look again at Quinto Plus, very, very good germinations, very, very high levels of tillers per plant. You might say, but David, doesn't Berry Gold look good? Yes, Berry Gold looks good, but Berry Gold didn't look great on the slow emerging variety. But what we get with Quinto Plus is we get a consistency. And that's a very, very important word, is consistency. Across all varieties, Quinto Plus has performed very, very well in terms of germination and establishment. And just to actually perhaps put a bit of a visual on that routing and how it actually looks. And ADAS conducted trials for us over the last number of seasons within the lab, where we wanted to see what actually does that impact of a seed dressing look on root development. And as you can see on the slide in front of you, you can see that the Quinto Plus treated plot has a much more higher level of lateral roots, secondary roots, deeper roots. The roots have a higher diameter and a greater root mass also. And this all lending itself to better germination and ensuring that your crop gets off to the very best possible start. So just to reiterate, growers are willing to invest in the best possible genetics and the best possible varieties. But what we need to be conscious of, in order for those varieties and genetics to reach their full potential, these need to be protected from the word go, and you will not get better protection than Quinto Plus. I'd like to thank you for your attention this morning, and if there are any further calls or queries around Quinto Plus, I would be delighted to take them at a later date through correspondence, perhaps on email. Thank you very much.
Right now, I hope you've enjoyed the presentations. There's certainly been a lot to take in there, and I'm delighted to see that we've got a large number of questions that are here there for our team to be able to answer. So I shall bring up the first question, and I think this question is one for Kirsty Richards. So Kirsty, if Palladium is going to be a Group 2 variety this autumn, can I mix this on a heap with Ixtaze or Siskin?
Hi there, everyone. Well, obviously the $1,000,000 question is it going to be a Group 2? As we said in the presentations, it very much looks like it could be a potential Group 2, but the final decision isn't through until November. But assuming it is, I would suggest that you contact your local home, and that would always be advisable to any grower. Check what their requirements are. Many mills would actually like their Group 2s to be kept separately. Some are happy with them fixed. So it's not an easy answer to that one. It's just finding out what your local home requires.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So the second question we've got here, and this is one for Mr. Dodds. Mark, what's the maturity on Henum?
Hi, Will. Hi, everyone. It's a little bit later than average. It's +3 at the moment. We will be doing some dry down information as we have on our varieties in other years when we get to August. If you are sowing fairly early, which is one of the good slots for the variety, then all of the maturities are relatively early to later sowing dates. So I don't see it as a problem. People tend not to like later varieties, but we'll get some more information from our dry downs, and it suits that early slot for earlier harvests.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see Henum, not just Henum, but some of the other varieties as well. Just looking at these maturities and getting that data back in the next couple of weeks. So on to the next one, and I think this is one for Gabby. Gabby, what's the parentage of KWS Feeris? And second part of the question is, what is the source of the BYDV tolerance? Oh, just. Do you want me to just come back again? Come. Yeah. Right, we're just the classic comment of this year. We're on mute. We're just changing that. We'll come back to that one in a minute. But James, the next one is one for you. Can you just explain the practicalities of how the new trait scheme works for me? What do I need to do in terms of the merchant paperwork?
So it's fairly simple. So let's walk through the whole process. This year, they will purchase C1 Feeris. You will drill that, you will enter it in the normal fashion. And next year, you will basically process and certify again as you would any other variety. This is when things change slightly. So you will then have a correspondence from BSPB where they will ask you where you have sold that certified product. So that's the first piece of paperwork you have to do. The second piece is that on every ton of C2 you sell, you need to have a comment either within the business, terms of business, or on the contract saying that it is applicable for a trade scheme under BSPB, which we will confirm all of this on email, but basically it's very simple from your point of view. And then from the grower's point of view, they will be contacted by BSPB when they do their farm safe seed declaration. So when they usually see paperwork from BSPB, and Feeris will be included in there. So it's really minimal paperwork, I suppose, compared to the BIPO scheme. We're seeing significantly less paperwork, and it's also coming at a time for growers when they would traditionally have a correspondence with a royalty collection agency also.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, James. And as James said, we're on hand here as well. It is a new scheme. It is a new way of doing things. So we're happy to talk people through this as well. Please pick up the phone and speak to us about it. I know that Sam's also available if you want to ask her as well about how the scheme's going to work. Now I hear that Gabby's back there. We're back live with Gabby again. So I'm going to go back to Gabby. And Gabby, the question for you is the parentage of KWS Feeris. What is it? And the second part of the question is, where does the source of the BYDV tolerance come from?
Okay, let's try this again. Feeris is an Amistad progeny, as mentioned in the video. I can't quite remember what the code is for the second variety. We have to come back to you on that one. Sorry?
Cosmos.
There you go. So Cosmos. So that's, Cosmos is comes from our German breeding program, and Amistad comes from our French breeding program. And quite different types, but yeah, I would say that Feeris is definitely like an Amistad step up. It looks quite similar to Amistad. The source of the BYDV tolerance, the gene YD2 has been in breeding for a very long time. It's been reported by at least 50 years ago. Our French breeder has been using it for about 10 years at least. He told us once that one day it occurred to him, he said, this is an easy disease to score in the field. There's this trait, why isn't nobody making use of this trait? And he made it his mission 10 years ago to start using YD2 in a lot of his breeding program, and he's seen success in France, and now with Feeris we're hoping to see the same success in the UK. So it's a well-documented tolerant gene that's been along for a long time and hasn't broken, because as I mentioned, it doesn't impact the development of the virus, so it isn't really a drive for the virus to overcome this tolerance, because it can grow and replicate just as it would in a susceptible line.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Gabby. Now we've got several questions on rye, so I'll ask first of all to JB. I've got the first one for you, and then I'll break it up with another one and come back to you, Dom. So first question, JB, is what is the current market uptake for hybrid rye in pig feeding, and where do you see this developing in the future?
Yeah, very good question. So the current market uptake is mainly for home feeding. So these are farmers who produce their own feed. Grain won't leave the farm. It's a self-contained harvest to feed operation. That would be in the region of possibly 15 to 20,000 tonnes for this harvest. The second part of the uptake question is actually availability for uptake. So if we couple the current buybacks for Harvest 21 together with the projected tonnage for Harvest 22, we get to not far off 100,000 tonnes, so it's possible to have a fivefold increase. That sounds like a big increase, but you have to bear in mind 18 months ago we had less than 5,000 tonnes. So in the course of, or the latter course of this summer, we will have a major compounder who will be able to report back on rye trialling that they've been doing for the last almost 3 years, and that's well timed, I think, for where the current market sits.
Thanks very much for that, JB. That's very exciting, and I think that's great to hear. Certainly, you know, there's the demand out there for rye, but the last piece of the puzzle that keeps on missing is that market. And I know that you and Dom have done an awful lot of work on that over the last couple of years, developing that as well. And so it's great to see that we're starting to get some really good results and feedback on that. So the next question I've got there is, this is one for James. Do we have any supply issues for stock seed this autumn?
Thank you, Will. As we currently sit here today, obviously we're before the safe arrival of harvest, but we have adequate supply, I would think, of pretty much everything you would want. The ones that will be under tightest supply will be KWS Lily, and will likely be, for those that may want some, Grafton. They're going to be the two that come under supply issues first. Looking to the candidates, as I said, Feeris, there'll be approximately 80 tonnes or so, and I think the demand for that may well outstrip that supply. So another one that I would speak to your growers sooner rather than later on. But in terms of everything else, we should be hopefully in quite a good place, weather permitting.
Thank you very much for that, James. And we just had another question in there. Can we confirm the C1 prices, which we will be doing after this as well? They will be going out there later on today, just to confirm all of that. So the next question there that we have got, and this is one for Dom here. Dom, what levels of ergot contamination are we likely to see in our hybrid rye varieties?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, obviously, you are not going to completely eradicate ergot in hybrid rye. It's impossible to say that even with our pollen plus genetics, there will not be ergot contamination, but it is significantly reduced. In a very quick nutshell, the pollen plus genetics closes the rye flower and shortens the period of pollination, so greatly reducing. The other key aspect that I really want to get across to people that are growing hybrid rye is you know, farm management. Keeping tram lines clean and wide stops secondary growth, which would increase the pollination period and the likelihood of ergot. So, you know, just to summarize, there is never going to be a situation where you can say categorically there will be no ergot, but the pollen plus genetics plus good farm management significantly reduces that risk.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Dom. And that brings us to the end of the questions, and now it also in turn brings us to the end of the session that we've had here today. Again, I'd like to repeat our thanks. Thank you very much for everybody for joining us here today. We really do appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed it. I mean, there's been a lot to take in there as well, and I'm sure there'll be other questions that you'll think about afterwards. Please pick up the phone, give us a call, drop us an email there, and we'd be delighted to be able to answer them. I know we've started to see more people here in our site, and if you haven't come to see the site so far this year, please get in touch and come and see it as well. It's been great to be able to start to see people again, and I hope as we continue through the course of the rest of the year, we'll all be able to get together in larger groups and see more of you as well. I'd like to thank you all very much for your support throughout the course of the year. Thank you very much for your business, and thank you for your ongoing support into the course of the next year. So from myself and the rest of the team here, we would just like to say goodbye to you all. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all soon.